I went to an all-white school where I could count on my fingertips the number of black students at that school, right? I had no choice but to assimilate. And I think when I was younger, I experienced a lot of anger toward my parents, a lot of frustration about putting me in that damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. But the older that I've gotten, I've gained some modicum of perspective about why they did what they did, though I don't agree with their choices. You know, my parents grew up poor, right? They didn't have any money, they didn't have a lot of opportunities. They had to bend over backwards to make white people feel comfortable, right? They had to code switch every day of their lives. They had to work twice as hard as their colleagues and peers just to be taken seriously in their area, right? And they didn't want me to have that same level of struggle, right? They wanted me to have access and opportunity. They wanted me to have education. They wanted me to be able to communicate with anybody, right? And so I think because of that, and because of the fact that we live in a nation where all of those things, education, good communication, social status, are equated with whiteness, for them, the only option for me was to expose me to whiteness and engulf me in whiteness from day one. And that's what I had to do, right? I learned how to act white, talk white, be white in these circles. But the thing is, when you're black, it doesn't matter, right? As a young child, all I wanted was to fit in. I didn't have any cultural understanding of race, right, or racism. All I knew was that, you know, I was different and I wanted to be normal, right? I didn't understand the social and racial implications and history behind that, right? But growing up, you know, there was no way you could win, right? Because if you talk white and act white, then they call you an Oreo, right? But if you talk black and act black, then they don't want anything to do with you because they're afraid, right? Because you're piercing their bubble. And so as a child, I felt caught up in between these two forces. On one side, you know, white culture, a culture that would never accept me because of the way that I looked, the color of my skin, the texture of my hair. And on the other side, black culture, a culture that, because of the way that I was raised, I didn't have any connection to. I've been robbed of the experience to connect to my own heritage, right? And I think anybody who's experienced an assimilationist upbringing knows the incredible pain and loneliness that comes from that, right? That comes from not feeling accepted anywhere that you are. And that's something you carry with you your whole life, right? And though what I experienced is common, and becoming more common for children in this generation, it's by no means a new thing. There is a great historical precedent for the experience that I had as a child and the assimilationist upbringing that I experienced, right? That goes back hundreds of years. And so I really want to ground that in some history so that y'all understand where this concept of assimilation came from, right, in this country. And so I want to take it back to the 17 and 1600s here in this country when the abolition movement was gaining some traction, right? When white people were waking up finally to the ills of slavery and recognizing like, oh shit, maybe this isn't okay, right? And so they started circulating a lot of ideas, and one idea that became quite pervasive in these circles was the idea of uplift suasion, right? And so the concept of uplift suasion is the idea that white slave owners and non-slave owning whites could be persuaded to let black people free if black people could prove that they were paragons of moral character. So let me phrase that in a different way. White people could be convinced that black people were deserving of freedom if those black people could show that they were well-educated, religious, chaste, abstained from alcohol, you know, embodied good moral principles and manners in every situation and scenario. Essentially, if we acted perfect and superhuman and assimilated completely to white culture, then finally we would be considered deserving of our freedom. But that logic inherently is racist. It doesn't matter if they were standing for abolition and trying to advocate for it. They continued to apply a force of oppression to us to make us fit into a mold, right? And that has led directly to where we are now, right? Because this concept of uplift suasion essentially said that you have to be perfect. But how perfect do you think someone can be when they've been subjected to generation after generation of psychological and emotional devastation, of dismantling a people's identity to the point where they truly believe and internalize this idea that they are subhuman, right? How much do you think they're going to rise up to that occasion and meet? That's fucking hard, it's impossible, and that's the point. The logic of racism is in fact an illogic in which black people cannot win. So, to preserve that racism and defend it, right? Because if a black person showed that they were capable of this level of assimilation, of embodying these white ideals and white education, then they were seen as uppity, right? They were seen as an exception to the norm. And they were, chastised for that, and berated and beaten and murdered, right, for being uppity. But then, if black people didn't pursue these ideals of adopting Western culture and civilization, then it simply proved the ideas that these racist slave owners had, that black people were subhuman and brutes. So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And though that iteration of this racism no longer exists, the same concept of assimilation has been preserved into this day and has resulted into the conundrum that I feel in my everyday life, right? So that's why I think it's important that we ground our experiences and our stories in history and understand where we're coming from. Because if we don't know where we're coming from, then how the fuck are we gonna know where we're going, right? So study yourself, study your history, study your culture. If you're white, study why it's essential for you to be here right now. Why, even though, sure, you didn't own slaves or contribute directly to the situation that black people in this country, understand that you are embodying and benefiting from that legacy every day of your damn life. Right? Understand that. And take some accountability of that, okay? Let's all start being accountable for ourselves. Don't count on leaders. Don't count on BIPOC folks to educate you and carry the torch for you. Light that flame yourself, for yourself, and figure out what the fuck it is that you need to do in this movement, okay? Because we're changing the world, but we can't do it alone. Everyone's got to activate on an individual level, all right? And so that's what I want to leave y'all with. Activate. Know your history, know yourself, know where you've been, so that you know where you're going. Thank you.